Welcome to another episode of Bridging the Gap. A question we get quite often in outright sale transaction is what to do about the accounts receivable. Typically, the seller will retain their accounts receivable and the buyer will collect it for them, as if it was their own. This process takes about 6 months, though it depends how long the practice has historically taken to collect the accounts receivable. For their services, the buyer gets a small fee, about 3 to 5% of the total amount that was collected. When funds are collected, the buyer should immediately notify the seller, and the seller will receive their payments within about a week to a month. Though, again, another negotiable point. If a patient has accounts receivable with both the seller and the buyer, the funds are typically allocated to the older accounts receivable, most likely to be the seller's, unless the patient was seen in an emergency by the buyer or insurance states otherwise. After the determined time period ends and the buyer no longer has to collect the seller's accounts receivable, the seller can attempt to collect any receivables that are left outstanding. On the other hand, the parties may agree to both sell and buy the accounts receivable. This lets the seller know that they have income now without having to wait for the time period when they're collected, and the buyer some working capital on a rolling basis. The buyer should be aware of the aging schedule, essentially what dollar amounts are dedicated towards 0 to 30 days, 31 to 60 days, 61 to 90 days, and 91 days plus. If the practice takes insurance, these schedules should be looked at for both insurance-based and private-based payments. For private party payments, the accounts receivable is valued at about 80 to 90% for 0 to 30 days, 70 to 80% for 31 to 60 days, and about 50 to 40% for 61 to 90 days. Anything older than 90 days is considered uncollectible and is likely worth nothing to the purchaser. For insurance-based payments, those percentages are likely increased because we're more certain that those insurance companies will pay rather than private individuals. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Bridging the Gap.